Whether these books turn out to be the hero of our library tour, or whether that station must belong to some other shelf, this video must show. Hi, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and this is a library tour video focused on the modern library, specifically the copper print spines on the trade paperbacks. We'll start off with fiction and lead off with David Copperfield from Charles Dickens. Recognize the opening quote. This is a very strong novel. I read it when I was very young, in grade school, and it's stuck with me ever since. There's a great sense of humor to it. It's autobiographical. It has all of the hallmarks of Charles Dickens' best writing. I would say it sort of vies for second place among what I regard as his best books. Bleak House is a clear number one, but this vies for second place with this work, Great Expectations. This was one that I really struggled to get into when I was younger, but reread in college and I really enjoyed it. I appreciated it a lot more. I love the David Lean film adaptation. That's an extraordinary film, but Great Expectations is very effective. I think it possesses perhaps the most focus of the major Dickens works. A side note is that the Pickwick Papers is super duper funny. We move on though to what is probably the single best novel, maybe of the 19th century, maybe ever, certainly of the Victorians, I think, and that would be Middlemarch from George Eliot. This book is extraordinary in that it creates an entire world and then allows characters to inhabit and live in that world. They're not characters who are sort of just being moved around on a chessboard like we see in some of the other 19th century or early 20th century novels. They're not just characters representing symbols or ideas. They seem to breathe. They seem to have some type of agency existing in this imagined world that George Eliot created. And I cannot recommend this book highly enough. Love it. We move over to another really fun, robust work, and that would be The Red and the Black from Stendhal. This is my favorite work from Stendhal, and it's probably my second favorite work from the 19th century in France. This edition that the Modern Library did is translated by Burton Raffel, who's also probably most famous for his translations of various Middle English or medieval French works into English. So I think he has a translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, also Tristan and Isolde. But this book is really interesting. There's a great deal of energy and zest to it. Sure, Julian Sorel is reprehensible at times, but he feels very modern in much of what he's doing. And even though he is the main thrust of the book, the other characters around him also seem to have a sense of humor, a sense of irony, and to inhabit the conversations and the scenes that they are in. So I enjoy this one. A work that I have really struggled to get into, but I want to love, would be the Charterhouse of Parma, also from Stendhal. And this is a translation from Richard Howard. Normally, I love Richard Howard's translations from French into English. For whatever reason, this book I have struggled with. I've started it 3 times. Most recently, I made it to page 213, so roughly halfway through, a little over 40% of the way through the book. And I struggle with this one. I don't know if it's Fabrizio as a character. I don't know if it's everything that's set in Italy, compared to the end of the Napoleonic Wars. There's just something about the book that hasn't quite gelled yet for me. So if anybody really loves this, just give me a comment or a note. I would like to discover the window to view this work through. And then one last one, much more recent work, not a copper class, it's copper spine, but Shadow Country from Peter Matthiessen. This was a National Book Award winner right after I graduated from college. I want to say in 2008, 2009, 2010. This book, though, is extraordinary. If you are someone who enjoys the writings of William Faulkner, please pick this up. This is a work that is sort of in 3 parts, and it was originally published as 3 separate works. Killing Mr. Watson, I can't remember the second one, and then Bone by Bone. And those 3 books were then re-edited. In some cases, whole characters were added to give a different perspective on the story. Shifts were made. And it's this massive saga-like retelling of Edgar Watson, E.J. Watson, who helped cultivate sugarcane in Florida in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And so we see initially in the first portion, we get all these different characters' perspectives on him, on his death, on the whole experiences across his whole life, legends that were told about him. And then the second part is from the perspective of two of his sons who have sort of lost contact with each other and gradually start to reconnect with who they remember their father as. And then ultimately in the third part, it's a first person narrative from Watson's point of view. And it continues to like shift the light that we've seen on the characters, the shadows that develop around not only Watson, but characters in his family. The character Henry, who ends up, pulling the trigger as the person who kills him, and that's clear right from the beginning. But this is a monumental work. Peter Matthiessen had spent years writing it and then revising it and rewriting it, and I love it. My wife is a huge fan of it too. We'll shift over really quick now to sort of nonfiction and poetry. We have the complete poetry and selected prose of John Donne. I'm a huge fan of John Donne. I read the songs and sonnets when I was in college and have been a fan ever since. I've had this volume for a long time. The prose, a good portion of it is actually his sermons that he gave. They're in the 17th century, and famously the "No man is an island, ask not for whom the bell tolls for thee" comes from one of John Donne's sermons, not from the various works that have used that as an epigraph or a title for their works. But I love his sensibilities as a poet, and the prose is interesting if you're into that type of work. If not, just grab a volume of his poetry. The basic works of Aristotle. Big Aristotle. This is a big book too. This is like 1,500 pages. If you really want a one-volume Aristotle, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It does have the major pieces that we think of with Aristotle. So of course, we have works like the Nicomachean Ethics, we have the Politics, we have Rhetoric, and the Poetics. And that one of the things that's true about those works is that those are akin to almost like the lecture notes of Aristotle. These are not comparable to the dialogues of Plato, where we really have a pretty good sense of like Plato creating these and his thoughts, not necessarily Socrates' thoughts, but Plato's thoughts, and sometimes Socrates' thoughts. Here, we don't necessarily have Aristotle's actual like writings. We have works that approximate his writings. Some of them prepared by him, some of them perhaps prepared by students of Aristotle. The Organon, which are probably like Aristotle's like actual works, is in here as well. So categories on interpretation, prior analytics, posterior analytics, topics, and on sophistical refutations. The Organon is collected in here, but Aristotle can be very dry, very boring, but it's important to remember that with Aristotle, those famous works like Nicomachean Ethics, Politics, Rhetoric, that's not necessarily what he was actually writing or sharing orally with his students. So if you're interested, that's one to check out. The Essential Writings of Christian Mysticism. This is edited by Bernard McGinn. This is a really cool work. Again, if you're interested in Christian philosophy, Christian thought, Christian existentialism, mystical thought, this combines a lot of really interesting perspectives, individuals, and there's an enormous number of sections. There's something like, I want to say 15 sort of chapters or sections, each of which has 3 to 8 like individual selections or passages or full works that relate to that topic. And so these are pretty interesting. There's a number of thinkers from the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, even up through more modern writers are represented in here. So this is one, if this is something that is like in your wheelhouse, highly recommend checking it out. The Basic Writings of Kant. Such a cool cover. Such a cool cover. If only the contents matched. This one's edited by Alan Wood. And so this has sections from the Critique of Pure Reason, Idea for a Universal History with Cosmopolitan Intent. I read that. Answer to the question, what is enlightenment? That's actually an interesting like little essay if you want to just look it up. What is enlightenment? Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals. Selections from Critique of Practical Reason, Critiques of Judgment, and Religion within the Limits of Reason Alone, along with concerning the common saying, this may be true in theory, but does not apply to practice. And then finally, the extended essay, To Eternal Peace. So these are not necessarily the full work from Kant, but they certainly give a good representation of his thinking, of his philosophy, and he's an enormous influence. I think there's a criticism there's a couple of criticisms for Kant. One of them, I think, for most readers in the 21st century is that he feels like he's moralizing perhaps within his philosophy. Others might just criticize that he's writing philosophy in general. But again, this is a really great sort of starter volume if you're interested in reading Kant and getting a sense of what he was exploring within human consciousness. The idea of like, what do we know, how do we know it, and what do we do with that? We'll close out with a volume that I read 3 years ago and really I enjoyed and was impressed by. That's the Basic Writings of Existentialism. This one's edited by Gordon Marino. And the writers who are represented in here, we see names that feel obvious. For example, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Heidegger, Sartre, but there are Albert Camus. But there are also writers like Miguel de Unamuno y Hugo, Simone de Beauvoir, and Ralph Ellison. So the combination of sort of philosophical writing and then writings that existed within novels is a really interesting combination, and I think it's very effective. From those, we have portions from Fear and Trembling and the Sickness Unto Death from Kierkegaard, two essays from On the Genealogy of Morals from Nietzsche, a section from the very first section from Notes from Underground and the famous Grand Inquisitor section from the brothers Karamazov, Saint Manuel Bueno Martyr from Miguel de Unamuno y Hugo, a passage from Being in Time by Heidegger, the essay Existentialism from Jean-Paul Sartre, along with sections from Being in Nothingness, the Ethics of Ambiguity from Simone de Beauvoir, two passages from The Myth of Sisyphus from Camus, and then the prologue to Invisible Man from Ralph Ellison. So together, those writings really, in roughly 500 pages? Almost exactly 500 pages. There's a sense in how this is almost like the Viking portable existentialist reader or something. That's what this feels like. It has compact passages, self-contained passages, and it gives a lot of different perspectives. There's a clear sense of the way that existentialism as a concept was evolving across roughly a century in this volume. So these were Modern Library trade paperbacks, and next time I do Modern Library, I'll try to show off the Modern Library giants and the ones that have sort of the paper bag dust jackets and such. But let me know if you've read any of these, and again, let me know if you've got a window into the Charterhouse of Parma. I'd love to appreciate that work even more. Thanks, everybody.